I served in places where silence meant survival, where the low hum of tension coiled around your neck like a noose. But I never expected to feel that again, especially not here, on my own street, pulling up to the gates of my own home. The late afternoon sun threw long golden shadows across the sidewalk as I turned into the cul-de-sac. My SUV's tires crunched softly on the gravel, the sound oddly loud against the stillness. Everything looked just as I remembered. My lawn freshly trimmed, the white pillars of my front porch glowing in the light. Except for the flashing lights, blue and red, bouncing off the marble tiles like a silent alarm. 2 police cruisers were parked squarely in my driveway. At first, I thought something had happened nearby. A break-in, maybe. But then I saw them. 2 uniformed officers posted near my front door, one with a clipboard, the other with a hand near his holster. Not scanning the neighborhood, not canvassing the area. They were waiting. For me. I parked and stepped out, instinct guiding my movements like muscle memory. Shoulders back, spine straight. Eyes alert, but non-threatening. It's something the Marines drill into you, even off-duty, especially when you're a black man standing before 2 white officers with badges and questions. The taller one approached. "Sir, I need to verify your identity before you proceed any further onto the property," he said. There was no malice in his tone, but no apology either, just protocol. "I'm David Jackson," I said, reaching calmly for my wallet. "This is my home. I just returned from overseas deployment. I've been gone for 6 months." I handed him my military ID and driver's license. He looked down at them, then up at me, expression unreadable. He turned slightly and radioed in, murmuring my name to dispatch as if it were just another task on a checklist. I glanced toward the front door, and that's when I saw her. A woman standing stiffly to the side, arms folded across a crisp blouse, HOA badge pinned perfectly on her chest like a medal. Her eyes were hard, cold, assessing. Her name was Cynthia Reynolds. I remembered seeing her once or twice before I left. Always on her porch, always watching. She stepped forward as if on cue. "I'm the one who called," she said. The officer didn't look surprised. Neither did she. "I've been living here for the past 3 weeks," Cynthia declared, with the audacity of a conqueror planting her flag. The house was vacant, and with rising crime in the area, I took it upon myself to move in and protect the neighborhood. I stared at her, sure I had misheard. "You've been living in my house?" I repeated, voice sharp but still tethered. She didn't flinch. "Yes. The Homeowners Association approved it. It was the best decision to ensure community safety." I turned to the officers. "This is trespassing." She had no permission, none. "I didn't authorize this. I didn't even know her." They hesitated. "We're still trying to determine the full situation," one of them said, holding up a hand as if I were the one escalating. Her statement and the HOA involvement complicate things. Complicate? My home, my name on the deed, my personal belongings, now co-opted in the name of protection. "You're telling me this woman just walked into my house and started living here, and you're not arresting her?" My voice cracked with disbelief. "You're entertaining this?" "She has documents," Cynthia added smoothly. "Emails, notes. We coordinated everything with the HOA. I looked around and realized the neighbors had begun to emerge. They always did. Peering through blinds, stepping onto porches, pretending to water plants. Watching with that same detached curiosity reserved for house fires and neighborhood gossip. And there I stood, David Jackson, U.S. Marine, homeowner, veteran, being treated like a trespasser in my own damn house. "She had no right," I said to no one in particular. No right at all. But Cynthia just stood there, calm as a librarian, unmoved by my anger, emboldened by the silence from those around us. The officers moved toward the door. "Sir, we'd like you to accompany us inside. We need to understand the situation more clearly," I wanted to scream. To remind them this wasn't a situation, this was a crime. But I knew better than to raise my voice in this moment, so I followed them inside, into the house I had bought with my own blood, sweat, and service. A house now filled with the faint scent of someone else's perfume, someone else's wine, someone else's fingerprints on the life I built. As the door creaked open, I crossed the threshold and stepped into a violation I never could have imagined. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Ever returned to find your world upside down? Drop a comment below. We're listening. The moment the front door clicked shut behind me, I stood in the foyer of my own house and felt like a stranger. My boots echoed across the marble floor, polished, cleaner than I'd left it. The scent hanging in the air wasn't mine. It was floral, artificial, invasive. Like a guest who'd overstayed her welcome and rearranged all the furniture on the way out. But before the war, before Cynthia, before HOA badges became power symbols, this place was my retreat, my reset. I bought this home 3 years ago, after my second deployment. It was the kind of house I'd once driven past and thought, that belongs to someone who's made it. Long white columns out front, tall windows facing the street like watchful eyes, and a backyard that sloped down toward a lake I rarely had time to enjoy. It wasn't just about the space, it was about the silence, the control, the safety. It was everything I had never had growing up. I wasn't born into comfort, south side of Baltimore, one of 5 kids. My mother worked 3 jobs, and my father left before I knew how to ride a bike. The Marine Corps was never a fallback. It was the only plan. Discipline gave me a sense of structure I never knew I needed. Rules weren't restrictions. They were relief. Predictable, fair. Mostly. I served for over 15 years. Iraq, Afghanistan, 2 tours in the Horn of Africa. I saw things I wish I could unsee. I buried friends whose names I still whisper when the nightmares wake me. I bled for this country, broke parts of myself. I'll never get back. But I also learned to lead, to protect, to value order. That's why this house mattered, because it was mine. Every brick, every screw, every frame on the wall was a statement that I had survived, that I had built something from nothing, a fortress, not just of stone and wood, but of dignity. So, to walk in and see her fingerprints on everything, Cynthia's wine glass, her clipboard notes on the kitchen counter, her smug sense of entitlement, wasn't just infuriating, it was violating. But I kept my voice calm. Military bearing, they call it. You learn to hold your ground with stillness. The officers moved through the house like it was a museum, speaking low, trying not to provoke. One of them asked if I wanted to document anything out of place. I said yes, every damn inch. I moved through the rooms slowly, like I was searching for tripwires. My living room, once decorated with Navy Challenge coins, black and white photos of my unit, and a battered flag I carried through Fallujah, now looked like a neighborhood watch headquarters. HOA pamphlets sat on the coffee table. My military memorabilia had been shoved aside, replaced. In the dining room, fresh flowers sat in a vase I didn't own. My kitchen, once organized by function and routine, was now arranged like a staged listing on Zillow. Fake cozy, falsely inviting. Cynthia didn't just move in, she tried to erase me. And still, I didn't yell. Because when you're a black man in America, yelling in your own home can get you arrested. Or worse. I've spent a lifetime practicing restraint. I was the quiet one in the unit. The guy who watched more than he spoke. Who followed orders but kept a mental log of every inconsistency. I fixed things, solved problems. In combat zones, that meant protecting civilians. In civilian life, it meant laying low, paying dues, avoiding conflict unless absolutely necessary. But I've also seen what happens when silence becomes complicity. I first moved to this neighborhood because it offered peace. Not just scenic peace, but social peace. Gated entrances, neatly trimmed lawns, and a homeowners association that promised community harmony. What I didn't expect was that harmony came with surveillance. That peace had a gatekeeper, Cynthia Reynolds. She introduced herself when I moved in, gave me a packet full of rules and a laminated sheet of voluntary compliance expectations. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. She asked where I worked, then nodded politely when I said I had just retired from the military. "You'll find we value structure here," she said. I remember thinking we might actually get along. But the truth was clearer now. She didn't respect discipline. She worshipped control. And control unchecked always turns into entitlement. For months before my deployment, she would send emails about minor things. A hose left coiled on the wrong side of the garage. A package left at the door for more than 24 hours. Once, she left a typed letter taped to my mailbox asking if I could conceal military gear when not in use, as it might cause unease to families with young children. I didn't respond. I didn't escalate. I deployed. And while I was gone, she moved in. I'm not naive. I know there's a certain profile Cynthia trusts, and I don't fit it. She saw an empty house owned by someone she never fully accepted as part of her idea of the neighborhood, and she took it. I stood in the hallway, the weight of it pressing down, the smell of someone else's laundry detergent in the air, the ticking of a clock that was no longer set to my rhythm. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my dog tags. They clinked softly against my palm, reassurance in metal. This wasn't about revenge, it was about reclaiming. And I wasn't just reclaiming property. I was reclaiming presence. Because if someone like Cynthia could decide that my absence gave her permission to occupy my home, then what else would she feel entitled to decide? That I didn't belong? That I didn't serve? That I didn't earn this? Number. She could wear her badge, wave her clipboard, cite her fake approvals. But this was still my house, and soon she was going to find out that protecting something doesn't mean possessing it, and that quiet men don't stay quiet forever. This is trespassing? The words came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't regret them. I was done playing polite. We were standing in my living room, and Cynthia Reynolds stood opposite me like she was giving a house tour. She didn't flinch at my accusation. She simply folded her arms across her HOA branded cardigan and stared at me with that same unshakable smugness that had defined her from the first moment she stepped into my life. "You weren't here," she said flatly. And with crime going up, the board and I made an executive decision. It was better for the house and for the community if it wasn't left vacant. I blinked at her, stunned. An executive decision? You mean you just decided to move into someone else's home? I didn't just decide, I acted. For the good of the neighborhood, I laughed, not out of humor, but out of disbelief. You moved in. You used my kitchen, rearranged my furniture, slept in my bed, and claimed it was all for the good of the neighborhood? Her jaw tightened. You don't understand the pressure we're under. Break-ins, package theft, suspicious vehicles at night. We have to be proactive. Proactive? I stepped forward, the words coming faster now, fueled by months of discipline finally unraveling. Cynthia, you crossed a line. You didn't file a report. You didn't call the police about an empty house. You called them on me, the owner. And now you're standing in my living room trying to justify squatting as community service? One of the officers cleared his throat. Let's all keep calm, please. We're just here to mediate the conversation. I turned to them. There's no conversation here. This is criminal trespassing. She has a key, the other officer said, almost apologetically. I'm sure she does, I snapped. She probably had a locksmith change the locks while I was away. Cynthia didn't deny it. Instead, she pointed casually toward the wall above the fireplace. That's when I saw it. My photos. Gone. The black and white images of my unit. The framed picture of my mom hugging me in uniform the day I got promoted to staff sergeant. The wedding photo of my sister that she insisted I hang, even though I told her it was too sentimental for the living room. All gone. In their place were framed certificates, HOA, event photos, a flyer for a neighborhood safety seminar. I turned slowly, my heart pounding. On the kitchen counter, my mail had been opened and sorted into labeled folders. A handwritten sticky note read, "Jury duty notice, follow up." Beside it was my laptop. Open. My personal laptop, which I had left shut and locked in my study, now sat humming quietly, the cursor blinking on a screen I hadn't seen since before my deployment. "Did you go through my computer?" I asked, my voice low. I was organizing communications. We needed to be ready in case anything happened while you were gone. You didn't know when I'd return. No one knew. You didn't tell anyone. You disappeared. I was deployed, Cynthia. And that's precisely why we had to step in. No one else was looking after this property. You mean your version of looking after it, I said, which apparently involves erasing me from my own home. A movement outside the front window caught my eye. Shadows. I walked to the door and opened it. A crowd had gathered. Half the cul-de-sac, it seemed. Neighbors in workout clothes, house slippers, with phones in hand and arms crossed. Some stood on the sidewalk, others leaned against parked cars, whispering, watching, always watching. Mrs. Daly from across the street gave me a faint nod, but quickly looked away when Cynthia stepped outside behind me. "Don't worry," Cynthia called out to them, as if she were the grand marshal of some impromptu HOA parade. "We're working things out." I've explained the situation. A few neighbors nodded, a few more looked unsure, and then there was the couple, from the corner house, Bill and Nancy, who had always waved politely when I jogged in the mornings. They stood with their arms crossed now, staring at me like I was the disruption. "Why did you even call the cops, Cynthia?" I asked her, loud enough for the crowd to hear. "You knew it was my house." "I didn't recognize the vehicle," she said smoothly. "You arrived unannounced. It was suspicious." "You mean my SUV in my driveway?" "The HOA has a policy to report unfamiliar vehicles." "There's no HOA policy that lets you live in someone's house." "That's your interpretation." "No," I said, turning fully toward the gathering. "That's the law." The murmurs grew louder. A man near the back, a new homeowner maybe, raised his phone and started recording. I didn't blame him. The officer nearest to me stepped forward. "Sir, we understand your frustration, but we're trying to maintain a peaceful environment while we sort this out." I could barely believe what I was hearing. "You're telling me this woman, this neighbor, can break into my home, live here, use my property, and because she says it's for security, we're not pressing charges?" "She claims the HOA approved it." "Then let's see it," I said, facing Cynthia again. "Show me. Show me the document that says you were given permission to occupy my house." She hesitated. Her confidence flickered for a second, just long enough to let the doubt seep into the onlookers' faces. "I have emails," she said. "Communications, discussions. Not authorization," I replied. "Sometimes you have to act without waiting for a stamp of approval." The community was vulnerable. "No," I said quietly. "You just thought you could get away with it." The silence that followed was louder than any shouting match. A few of the neighbors backed away. The recording phone lowered slightly. The spell was breaking. And Cynthia knew it. "I'm just trying to keep us safe," she said again, this time to the crowd, her voice faltering. "I did what no one else had the courage to do." "No," I said again, turning to the officers. "You did what no one else had the arrogance to do." One of the officers looked at his partner and finally spoke with some clarity. "Ma'am, you need to gather your things. You're not authorized to be on this property." She opened her mouth to argue, but the look in his eyes stopped her. Cynthia turned back inside, moving stiffly, like each step was a retreat. Her pride held her head high, but the battle, this one at least, was lost. The neighbors said nothing as she passed them, and I said nothing as I locked the door behind her. But make no mistake, this wasn't over, not by a long shot. The silence in the house was different now. Before, it had been intentional, something I chose. I designed this place to be still, to hold me like a breath between battles. I had picked neutral tones for the walls, solid oak furniture, and blackout curtains in the bedroom. The silence wasn't emptiness, it was peace. But now, the silence felt hollow, like the echo after a door slams shut. After Cynthia was escorted out and the crowd dispersed, I walked through the house alone. The officers were long gone, leaving behind nothing but the faint odor of leather belts and radio static. I didn't speak. I didn't turn on music or the TV. I didn't call anyone. I just listened. To the creak of my own floorboards beneath boots that no longer felt welcome. To the way my refrigerator hummed, louder than I remembered. To the wind rattling the blinds Cynthia had adjusted. She had touched everything. That night, I didn't sleep in the bedroom. I couldn't. The thought of lying on a mattress she had used was too much. So I settled into the couch in the den, an old, sturdy leather one I'd brought back from my first apartment after the Marines. I stared at the ceiling for hours, tracing the fan blades with my eyes, counting the rotations. There were no dreams, only memory. I used to believe in order, in rules, in the systems that kept society upright. That was what the Corps taught us. No one is bigger than the mission. No one is above the chain of command. You follow procedure, you protect your people, and the system protects you in return. But in this quiet suburban war zone, there were no chains of command, no procedures, just committees and opinions, just people like Cynthia who turned neighborhood safety into a power trip and expected applause for crossing boundaries. She didn't break in like a thief. She came in like a savior. And somehow, that made it worse, because she believed in what she did. She truly thought she was protecting something, that her judgment was superior to mine, that her comfort was worth more than my consent. I thought of the Marines I had served with, how fiercely we respected the space of others. Your cot, your pack, your locker, that was your world. You didn't touch another man's gear without permission. Not ever. Even in the worst hellholes on earth, we honored that unspoken code. But here, in this tree-lined cul-de-sac with welcome flags and HOA newsletters, that respect didn't exist. And I couldn't shake the feeling that it had something to do with who I was. I remembered my first week in the neighborhood, the stares I got when I brought in furniture, the cautious smiles that didn't quite reach the eyes, the time Cynthia had asked, almost too casually, if I rented or owned. I own, I had said. She blinked just once, then smiled. Well, we're happy to have you. It had sounded polite, but underneath there was something else. A test, maybe, a calculation. And now, 3 years later, she'd failed to recognize me in my own driveway. Or maybe she had recognized me and just decided I didn't belong anymore. Either way, the betrayal sat heavy in my chest. I moved through each room slowly that morning, reclaiming them inch by inch. In the kitchen, I threw out her flowers. I wiped down the counters, even though they were already spotless. In the study, I found the whiteboard she'd mounted on the wall, filled with notes about patrols and meetings, as if my home was now a police precinct. I ripped it down. Underneath, the faint imprint of where my family photo collage had once hung was still visible. The wall was a shade lighter, untouched by sun or dust. That was the moment it hit me hardest. This place, my refuge, my fortress after deployment, had become a crime scene, not because of broken windows or stolen items, but because of something deeper, something more intimate, violation without violence, disrespect disguised as diligence. I found my old shoebox under the desk. Inside were the artifacts of another life, dog tags, commendation ribbons, faded photos from Camp Leatherneck, and a letter from my mother, handwritten in that tight cursive she used to send every Christmas. Wherever you go, it read, let it be yours. Let it be safe. Let it be home. I sat there on the floor for a long time, holding that letter like a lifeline, because right now, I didn't feel safe, and this didn't feel like home. I didn't want revenge, but I needed accountability, the kind the Corps had taught me to demand, the kind you don't yell for. You document, you build, you prove. So, I took photos. Every room, every object that had been moved, used, altered, the wine glass, the open laptop, the printed HOA flyers in my guest room. I cataloged everything. Not because I needed the proof for myself, but because people like Cynthia only understand paperwork and procedures when they're being used against them. As I worked, I thought about the world she operated in. The meetings, the emails, the whisper networks that move faster than facts. The way she wore authority like a second skin, always ready to weaponize it against those who didn't fit the mold. And me? I was a black man in a luxury home with a military background and no criminal record. But that didn't matter. All it took was one woman's confidence to cast suspicion, one phone call to turn my homecoming into a spectacle, one clipboard to overwrite my name. That day, I sat on the back deck for hours. The lake shimmered in the distance, untouched by all this drama. Ducks paddled near the reeds. The sun dipped behind the tree line, warm and soft. This was the life I had fought for, and I'd be damned if I let anyone take it from me, especially not with a smile and a security badge. It started with a sticky note, a bright yellow square of paper left on my refrigerator door, as if this house had somehow become a shared dorm. In bold black marker, the handwriting read, "Neighbors feel safer knowing someone is home." CRI stood there, staring at it like it was a threat wrapped in kindness, a final stamp on everything she thought. She'd accomplished here. I crumpled it, threw it in the trash, then pulled it out again and placed it in a Ziploc bag. It wasn't just a note, it was a confession. From that moment on, my anger stopped simmering. It started boiling. The next discovery came later that night when I finally forced myself to confront the laptop. I had left it shut and password protected in my study drawer. But when I opened the lid now, the screen blinked to life, already logged in. Someone had guessed, hacked, or bypassed their way in. The email tab was open. My inbox showed threads I didn't recognize, forwarded messages to community members, invitations to watch group planning sessions. Cynthia had used my personal device to schedule meetings in my house. The audacity was one thing, but this was deeper. This was a digital fingerprint, her fingers on my keys, her words sent from my name. One thread stood out. It was a message to a group titled Neighborhood Safety Committee, sent from my email address. We'll meet at David's place again Tuesday evening. I'll have updates on patrol rotations and suspicious activity near the lakeside trail. Entry through the side door, please. Keep vehicles discreet. She signed it. Cynthia Reynolds, acting liaison, temporary occupant, HOA, authority pending. My vision went white. I scrolled. There were at least 3 more meetings, complete with RSVP confirmations, neighbors thanking her for being proactive, people praising her leadership during a time of uncertainty. Some of them had walked past me in the street this morning without a word. They had all been here, in my house. I grabbed my phone and started taking photos of every screen, every email, every time stamp. Then I moved through the house with purpose, like sweeping a battlefield for minds. In the guest bathroom, an open toiletry bag. In the laundry room, a single pink sock stuck to the inside wall of the dryer. In the bedroom closet, a plastic storage bin labeled HOA watch materials, filled with printed reports, neighborhood maps, even a set of walkie-talkies still in their packaging. She hadn't been watching the neighborhood. She'd been staging a takeover. And the neighborhood, they had let her. That night, I called my attorney. Jason McCall had been a friend of mine since basic. He'd gone JAG, then civilian. Quiet guy, smart, methodical. The kind of lawyer who didn't talk unless it mattered. When I told him what had happened, there was a pause on the line. "You're telling me," he said slowly, "that someone moved into your house while you were deployed, used your laptop, held meetings here, and the HOA, what? Did nothing?" "Claimed they didn't know," I said. "But she says otherwise." "You documented it?" "Everything. I'm coming over in the morning." At 9 a.m., Jason showed up with a binder under one arm and a calm fury in his eyes. We sat at the kitchen table, my table, and went through everything. The emails, the physical evidence, the note, the witnesses. By noon, he had made 2 calls, one to the police and one to the HO. "Time to put this on the record," he said. "We'll start with a formal police report. Then we go to their office. Do you think they'll back her up?" He looked at me. "Doesn't matter. If they do, we sue them too." The officer who arrived was younger than the ones from before, more alert. He took photos, asked questions, logged everything. "This is not something we see often," he said, eyebrows raised as he scanned the watch group plans on my laptop. "It's not negligence," Jason added. "It's unauthorized use of private property, computer tampering, and potentially identity misrepresentation." The officer nodded, lips tight. "We'll document all of it. If you're filing charges, you've got a strong start." We drove to the HOA office next. It was located inside a modest community center building with glass doors and cheerful landscaping, like it was trying to mask the bureaucracy inside. The front desk attendant looked up and froze when she saw us. "Can I help you?" "I'm David Jackson," I said, "and I'd like to speak to whoever claims they authorized Cynthia Reynolds to live in my home." She disappeared down a hallway and returned with 3 board members. We sat in a small conference room, the air conditioned but tense. I let Jason speak. He was surgical, precise. "On what date?" he asked. "Did the board authorize Ms. Reynolds to enter, occupy, and host meetings at Mr. Jackson's private residence?" The president of the HOA, a graying man with wire-framed glasses and a tremor in his hands, blinked. We did not authorize any such thing. At most, there was discussion about her concerns for the neighborhood. But we certainly didn't give permission for her to reside there." "Did you inform her that she was not allowed to?" "Well, That would depend on the context. Jason leaned in. Do you realize that silence, when you knew she was living there, can be construed as passive approval, especially if she claimed to act under HOA authority? One of the women on the board shifted uncomfortably in her seat. We thought she was just checking in on the property. We didn't know she had moved in. She used my client's computer, Jason continued, to impersonate him and coordinate security meetings. She opened his mail. She even left handwritten notes asserting her right to occupy the home. Would you like to see the photos? No one answered, so he pulled out his phone. One by one, he showed them. The sticky note, the inbox, the open wine glass beside a HOA meeting agenda. By the end, the board members were silent. This is just the beginning, Jason said as we stood. We'll be issuing a formal letter and pursuing charges. Outside the office, I finally exhaled. The sun was hot, but the weight on my chest had shifted. I wasn't helpless anymore. I was taking it back. One document, one step, one line of truth at a time. Cynthia had said, I did what needed to be done. Now it was my turn to say the same. But my kind of justice came with facts and signatures. If there's one thing the military teaches you, it's how to plan a counteroffensive. Not with noise, not with brute force, but with structure, clarity, and quiet precision. So that's what I did. The day after confronting the HOA board, I sat at my dining room table, now stripped of Cynthia's decorative centerpieces, and began laying everything out like I was preparing for a mission briefing. Legal files on the left, evidence folders on the right, timeline in the center. Jason had already prepped the legal paperwork, but I wanted more than a lawsuit. I wanted the truth out, and I wasn't going to let it die in a filing cabinet. I opened my contact list and began reaching out to people I hadn't spoken to in months. Fellow veterans, old friends in local media, a Navy buddy who now ran a civil rights podcast. I didn't need sympathy. I needed amplification. Because what had happened to me wasn't just an incident, it was a window into something larger. I knew the moment I walked through that door and saw police waiting. Something deeper was at play. I wasn't just a homeowner returning from deployment. I was a black man whose authority was suspended the second a white neighbor questioned it. Cynthia hadn't needed proof. All she needed was certainty, her certainty, and the system hesitated. That hesitation still burned in my memory, so I called in people who didn't hesitate. Jason connected me with a legal journalist named Mia Santos. She met me at the house a few days later, eyes sharp behind a notepad, listening carefully as I walked her through the chain of events. You served how long? She asked. 15 years? And while deployed, your home was occupied by someone who, let me get this right, claimed HOA approval to move in and host meetings? Without my consent, without any legal documentation, and the board still won't condemn her outright. Mia looked up from her notes. That's more than negligence. That's complicity. Exactly. She wasn't the only one who felt that way. The podcast episode aired first. It was called Occupied by Authority, When Neighbors Become Trespassers. My voice, usually reserved for formal interviews or briefings, spoke steadily across the airwaves, narrating the surreal descent from welcome home to legal warfare. Then came the local news. A segment aired during prime time, footage of my house, a blurred shot of the sticky note, an interview with a neighbor who, anonymously, admitted they had attended a watch group meeting without knowing I hadn't authorized it. Within 48 hours, the pressure shifted. HOA board members began issuing careful statements. None of them explicitly condemned Cynthia, but their tone changed. Instead of phrases like misunderstanding or gray area, I started hearing words like violation of boundaries and outside our authority. Still, no reprimand, no accountability. Because that would require admitting the structure they had built wasn't built to protect people like me. Jason and I drafted a formal demand for a board hearing, not just for damages, but for action. A motion to formally censure Cynthia Reynolds and establish a policy preventing unilateral occupancy during homeowner absences. They stalled. We're reviewing procedural language. We need community input. We're considering alternatives. That was when I saw it clearly. This wasn't about one woman. This was about the system that enabled her. an informal network of whispered concerns and implicit trust, propped up by policy that could be bent, misinterpreted, or ignored depending on who was asking and who was being asked about. Cynthia had only been the face. The real problem was what stood behind her: silence, the kind that doesn't need permission to cause harm. And I knew silence like that. I'd seen it overseas, villages where officials claimed neutrality while deals were made under the table, where those who abused power didn't wear uniforms, but they wore confidence. The same kind of confidence Cynthia wore. So I treated this like I would any other deployment. I assessed the terrain, I mapped the power lines, and then I built a strategy. I reached out to a local veterans group. They offered a press platform and legal resources. I joined a homeowners' rights organization that had been quietly documenting HOA overreach across the country. And when an editor at The Atlantic responded to Mia's pitch, I gave them the interview no one in this neighborhood wanted to hear. The article's title was Home Interrupted: What Happens When the HOA Thinks It Knows Better Than You. It went viral. Suddenly, my quiet cul-de-sac wasn't so quiet anymore. Reporters called, civil liberties groups emailed. Even a local politician tweeted, praising the Marine veteran defending his home against unauthorized occupation and bureaucratic silence. HOA. Emergency meetings became weekly events. I wasn't invited, but I knew what was being said. Some neighbors supported me openly. Others blamed me for bringing media attention to a peaceful community. Peaceful? There was nothing peaceful about what had happened here. Cynthia hadn't just taken over my house. She had exposed a loophole big enough for anyone with a badge and a smile to crawl through. And the HOA, those self-declared stewards of community order, had nothing in place to stop it. Because they never thought they needed to. Because they trusted her judgment, trusted her whiteness. They would never admit that aloud. But I saw it. I lived it. And as my case gained traction, the board finally relented. They released a statement. We regret the lack of formal policy that allowed this confusion to persist and will implement immediate measures to ensure clear boundaries and homeowner protections moving forward. They never said her name, never apologized to me directly. But I didn't need their apology. I had something better. I had their discomfort, their acknowledgement that what happened wasn't normal, wasn't okay. And I wasn't going to let it fade into neighborhood gossip. I was going to make sure it stayed a case study, a warning, a reminder that even in neighborhoods with manicured lawns and patriotic mailboxes, power doesn't always wear a uniform. Sometimes it wears pearls. The invitation arrived via email, though I doubt they ever expected me to accept it. HOA Special Session. Community discussion on recent events. No mention of my name, no mention of Cynthia's, just recent events, like someone had accidentally overwatered the azaleas or left their trash bins out past pickup day. But I RSVP'd anyway, not out of spite, out of obligation. They needed to hear the truth from my mouth, in my voice, with my presence. Because that's what had been stolen from me the moment she stepped through my door and declared herself protector of a community that never asked to be protected. The meeting was held in the community center's main hall. Rows of folding chairs were neatly arranged. A podium stood at the front beneath a banner that read, Stronger Together, Building Trust and Safety. Irony dripped from every word. The room was packed. Neighbors I hadn't seen in months showed up with stiff postures and guarded eyes. Some waved nervously. Others looked away. I saw Bill and Nancy from the corner lot. He avoided eye contact. She offered a tight smile. Cynthia was already there. She sat in the second row, her HOA badge still pinned proudly to her lapel like nothing had happened. Her hands were folded in her lap, and she wore the same expression I'd seen that first day. Equal parts entitlement and composure, as if nothing, not even public scandal, could pierce her certainty. The board opened with their usual formalities. Then, as if reading from a script pre-cleared by legal, the president cleared his throat and said, We recognize that recent concerns have deeply affected our community, and tonight we want to foster a respectful and productive dialogue. And then he called my name. I didn't walk, I marched, like I was back in uniform, up to the podium. I didn't need notes. I had lived every word I was about to speak. "I'm David Jackson," I began, voice steady, measured. "Some of you know me. Many of you have seen me around, waved at me from your porches, maybe nodded when I jogged past. I've lived here 3 years. I served 15 in the Marine Corps, and until recently, I thought I knew what safety felt like." You could hear a pin drop. 3 weeks ago, I returned from overseas deployment to find my house occupied. Not burglarized, not vandalized, occupied by someone who decided unilaterally that my absence gave her the right to claim my space, to use my kitchen, to sleep in my bed, to host meetings in my name. I let the words hang there. I was treated as a stranger in my own home. And when I protested, I was told by neighbors that she meant well, that her intentions were noble, that I should be grateful she kept my place from being targeted by criminals. I glanced toward Cynthia. She didn't blink. But good intentions don't override consent, and they certainly don't grant access to someone else's home. I took a deep breath. Tonight, I'm here not just to recount what happened, but to make sure it never happens again. I reached into my bag and pulled out the binder Jason had helped me prepare. I've submitted a formal civil lawsuit against Ms. Reynolds for unlawful entry, identity misrepresentation, and violation of privacy. The evidence has been shared with local law enforcement. It includes photographs of altered furniture, personal documents accessed without permission, and eyewitness statements from neighbors who attended unauthorized meetings inside my home. I placed a copy on the podium for the board to see. Additionally, I continued, we have reviewed the HOA's communication records and found no official authorization permitting Ms. Reynolds to occupy the property. No vote, no motion, no minutes, just silence. And that silence has been used to justify trespass. A murmur rippled through the crowd. I turned to them. And while we're here tonight under the banner of trust and safety, I ask you, whose trust? Whose safety? Because mine was dismissed. My property was considered accessible. My identity was borrowed, and my voice wasn't heard, until now. I stepped back from the podium. Silence. Then one person clapped. It was slow, deliberate. Then another joined, and another, until the entire room was filled with the kind of applause that doesn't celebrate. It affirms. It says, "We hear you now." I returned to my seat. Cynthia stood. Her face remained calm, but her eyes no longer shone with the same steel. "I did what I felt was necessary," she said. "The home was empty. The community was vulnerable. I didn't act out of malice. I acted out of protection." A few nods here and there, but far fewer than before. She went on, her tone growing brittle. "We live in a time of uncertainty. Safety must be prioritized. I don't regret stepping in. But you weren't invited," someone called out from the back. "You weren't asked." More murmurs. Then a voice I recognized, Mrs. Daly. "She hosted meetings in his living room," she said, standing. "She invited people over and never once told us he didn't know. She acted like it was her place." Another neighbor chimed in. "It wasn't the first time either. Cynthia's let herself into my backyard twice, said she was inspecting the fence line. I didn't say anything back then, but now I regret it." The air shifted, no longer tense with fear. Now it was thick with revelation. Someone else stood up. "She told me she had keys to multiple houses for emergency checks. I thought that was HOA policy." The board members began exchanging glances. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about them, their reputation, their structure, their failure. And Cynthia? She stood alone, surrounded by the weight of her own decisions. Her years of curated influence unraveling in minutes, not from outrage, but from simple, undeniable facts. The meeting adjourned without resolution, but I walked out of that room knowing exactly what had changed. The mask had slipped, the curtain had lifted, and behind it stood a woman who had mistaken control for care, and a community that had let her, until now. It didn't happen all at once. There was no grand announcement, no fireworks, no walk of shame. But a week after the meeting, the bulletin board near the community park displayed a new flyer, subtle, tucked between a lost dog notice and a pancake breakfast invitation. Cynthia Reynolds has stepped down from her role as neighborhood watch liaison, effective immediately. That was it. No thanks for her service. No glowing tribute to her years of dedication. Just a simple sentence in 12-point font, printed in black and white. I stood in front of it for a full minute, letting the silence of that line sink in. She was out. The woman who once acted like the HOA was her personal fiefdom, who spoke for the neighborhood like she had been elected by God himself, was gone from her self-appointed throne. No replacement had been named, no one volunteered, and for the first time in a long time, the space she left behind felt like an opportunity instead of a threat. 2 days later, I received an envelope in the mail, not from the court, not from the HOA, but from a neighbor. Inside was a short handwritten note. David, I should have spoken up sooner. I went to one of the meetings she held in your house. I knew something felt wrong, but I didn't question it. I'm sorry for that. Glad you came back. Marlene, Lot 7. Small words. But they meant something. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that the worst kind of silence isn't the one that follows injustice. It's the one that enables it. The silence that tells you, don't rock the boat, even as the water fills your lungs. That silence was breaking now. Slowly, unevenly, but it was breaking. The HOA board, under mounting pressure from residents and media coverage, held another emergency meeting, this time behind closed doors. Jason and I didn't attend, but we didn't need to. The results came via certified letter. Policy Amendment 22A, effective immediately, no HOA member or community. Representative may enter, occupy, or utilize private residential property for any purpose, including neighborhood safety monitoring, without the documented and written consent of the property owner. There it was, in ink, the kind of line that can't be crossed without consequence anymore. They also included a statement for the record. We regret the ambiguity that contributed to recent misunderstandings and are committed to restoring trust within our community. No mention of names, no direct apology. But I didn't care, because the house was mine again, not just legally, not just technically, but spiritually. I started putting things back where they belonged. I rehung my family photos, the photo of my unit in Kandahar, my mother's letter now framed in the hallway outside the study. The flag case went back on the mantel, front and center. I deleted the folders Cynthia had left on my laptop and wiped the hard drive clean. Every drawer, every closet, every surface she had touched, I reclaimed them all, one by one, not out of pettiness, out of purpose. This wasn't about restoring furniture, it was about restoring dignity. And dignity, once bruised, takes time to heal. Neighbors began talking to me more, nothing dramatic, just nods, porch waves, the occasional shared comment while watering plants. Some still avoided eye contact, but the atmosphere had shifted. The fear of confrontation had given way to something quieter. Respect, maybe, or accountability. Maybe both. Cynthia? She still lived here. I saw her one morning walking her dog, head held high but no longer flanked by the false armor of HOA authority. No badge, no clipboard. Just a woman walking past the very house she once occupied. She didn't look at me. I didn't look away. And that, I decided, was enough. We weren't going to be friends, we weren't going to rebuild trust, but we were going to coexist, on my terms now, not hers. The community didn't become perfect overnight. There were still whispers, still a few who grumbled that things were better before, as if trespassing was a form of civic duty. But others began asking real questions about how the HOA operated, about what authority actually looked like, about who got to decide what was safe, and for whom. A younger couple, new to the neighborhood, stopped me outside the mailbox kiosk. "Hey," the man said, "we read your story online. That was something. Thanks for standing up." I nodded. Wasn't much of a choice. "It's making a difference," his partner added. "People are watching how these boards operate now. Yours wasn't the only one." It wasn't. Messages had poured in from across the country. Other veterans, homeowners, people who had had their privacy trampled by neighborhood politics dressed up as protection. They saw themselves in what happened here, and that more than any lawsuit or HOA amendment, made the fight worth it. I had no interest in becoming a hero, but I was damn sure no one was going to rewrite the story of my home without me holding the pen. That evening, I sat on the porch as the sun dipped behind the trees. The lake shimmered just beyond the backyard, and the wind rustled the leaves with a peace I hadn't felt in weeks. I leaned back in my chair. No headlines, no hearings. Just a man, his house, and the air finally still again. And that was enough. The light hits different now. Late afternoon sun spills softly through the tall windows of my living room, casting long golden streaks across the hardwood floor. It touches the framed photos, the bookshelves, the quiet corners that once felt invaded, and somehow, it feels like the house is exhaling with me. This room had witnessed it all, the disbelief, the confrontation, the restoration, and now, the peace. I sit on the edge of the couch, elbows on my knees, dog tags swinging loosely between my fingers. Outside, the wind rustles the trees in the backyard, and somewhere in the distance, a lawnmower hums lazily into the evening. Ordinary sounds, beautiful in their simplicity. But this house is not ordinary, not to me. To some, it's just a property on a plot of land, a structure with walls and windows, worth a certain number of dollars per square foot. To me, it's a line in the sand, a promise, a monument to survival and self-worth. It's the place I came home to after every mission, where I hung my uniform for the last time, where I whispered prayers for friends I buried overseas, where I woke each morning believing I had finally earned a life no one could take from me, until someone tried. What Cynthia did was not just personal, it was symbolic. She didn't just cross my threshold. She crossed the idea that ownership means protection, that dignity doesn't need permission, that the space we call home is sacred, even when we're not standing in it. But the fight is over now, not because someone lost, but because truth endured. The court proceedings are still in motion, and the paperwork continues. But in here, within these walls, the restoration is complete. I didn't win by shouting. I didn't fight fire with fire. I fought with facts, with calm resolve, with every quiet act of defiance that said, "You don't get to rewrite my story." The neighbors still wave, some more freely now, others still cautious, as if they're learning how to trust again, not just me, but themselves. And that's okay. Healing takes time. As for Cynthia, I haven't seen her much. Her presence has shrunk from authority to afterthought. People don't whisper about her the way they used to. The spell is broken, the badge no longer dazzles. I don't need her apology, because this isn't about vengeance. It never was. This was about reclaiming what was already mine, not just the house, but the boundaries it represents. Home isn't just a place, it's a statement, a declaration of who we are, what we've earned, and where we draw the line. And when someone crosses that line, you don't just rebuild the fence. You remind them, gently or forcefully, that respect is not optional. That's what I carry forward, not bitterness, but clarity. The kind that says, you can't silence someone who never stopped speaking, only someone no one listened to. Well, they're listening now, and maybe, just maybe, this story will help someone else hold the line in their own life. Have you ever had to fight to reclaim what was already yours? Share your story below. Where do we draw the line between protection and control? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Because sometimes the quietest homes carry the loudest truths.